What happened when a rich rancher bought 3 giant women at auction just for the night and couldn't walk the next day? Witness this unbelievable, true-inspired story right here on Whisper of the Past. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Let's get started. Clayton Hayes had always lived a life that most men could only dream of. A self-made rancher with hundreds of acres of sprawling land in the heart of Texas. He had everything he could want: luxury cars, a mansion with rooms that seemed to stretch endlessly, and a reputation for hosting parties that became the talk of the state. People knew him as extravagant, flamboyant, and occasionally reckless, someone who used his wealth to indulge his whims and entertain his friends. But even with all his wealth, Clayton always sought novelty, the thrill of the unexpected, and the kind of experiences money couldn't simply buy elsewhere. On a sweltering summer evening, Clayton received an invitation that piqued his curiosity. Unlike the usual high society invitations for charity balls, polo matches, or art auctions, this one was unusual, mysterious, and undeniably intriguing. It announced a private auction in Houston, one that promised rare and extraordinary offerings. The wording alone made his pulse quicken. For the discerning gentleman seeking the remarkable and the extraordinary, 3 women of exceptional stature and presence will be available for private engagement for one night only. Clayton raised an eyebrow and chuckled to himself. He had never attended such an event, but the lure of something unusual and lavish was impossible to resist. The next day, he arrived at the auction hall, a grand venue with polished oak floors, crystal chandeliers, and rows of velvet-draped seats. The air was thick with anticipation, murmurs, and the soft clinking of glasses as the city's elite mingled. But what caught Clayton's attention immediately were the women. They stood on raised platforms, each more striking than the last, and each towering above 6 feet in height. They were not models in the conventional sense. They exuded strength, confidence, and an almost commanding presence that made the room fall silent whenever they moved. Clayton's eyes swept across the group. There was Ava, a fiery redhead with emerald eyes that seemed to peer into your soul, standing at 6'2", her posture radiating control and poise. Next was Serena, a statuesque brunette at 6'4", her athletic frame betraying strength honed from years of disciplined training. Finally, there was Lila, a blonde of 6'1" with sharp, confident features and a gaze that seemed both teasing and challenging. Together, they dominated the room, their presence turning what might have been a standard auction into something electric. Clayton felt a thrill rush through him. On a whim, driven by his usual blend of arrogance and curiosity, he decided to bid. Not just for one, but for all 3 women, purely for a private evening at his ranch. The auctioneer's gavel fell, the bidding started, and within minutes the competition became fierce. Other wealthy attendees tried to outbid him, their faces a mix of irritation and disbelief. But Clayton's checkbook was as vast as his ego. He won the bid. The final words of the auctioneer echoed in the hall, sold to Mr. Clayton Hayes for one unforgettable night. The women were escorted to Clayton's private jet, and he couldn't help but feel a rush of anticipation as he followed them. His mansion, usually quiet except for the occasional house staff, would be transformed tonight. He imagined the grandeur of his estate, the sprawling gardens, the high ceilings, and the rooms that had hosted countless parties. But nothing like this. The 3 women arrived at his ranch as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the fields. They moved with ease, their presence amplifying the already grand ambiance of the mansion. The night began with polite introductions, laughter, and small talk. Clayton attempted to impress them with tales of his wealth, his adventures, and the grandeur of his ranch. But it quickly became apparent that these women were not impressed by money or land. They were confident, self-assured, and full of playful energy that challenged Clayton at every turn. Ava challenged him to a race across the garden. Serena tested his strength with playful arm wrestling, and Lila, with a mischievous grin, dared him to a series of games that combined strategy, speed, and endurance. Clayton, proud and competitive, accepted each challenge, determined to prove that he was up to the task. Hours passed, and Clayton realized almost too late that he had underestimated them. These women were not merely tall, they were powerful, agile, and unrelenting. Every movement, every playful challenge left him exhausted. He tried to keep up, but his muscles ached, his stamina waned, and by midnight he was forced to sit back and watch, breathless and humiliated, as they continued their energetic games with laughter and teasing that filled the mansion. They moved gracefully around him, commanding the space with their presence. Clayton, sprawled on the plush carpet, could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him. He had imagined a night of fun, perhaps some superficial entertainment, but what he received was far more intense than he had anticipated. The energy, strength, and confidence of these women were overwhelming, and his body, pampered by a life of comfort, was paying the price. He felt every ache, every strained muscle, and every pang of fatigue. Yet, despite the discomfort, he was exhilarated, mesmerized by their power and charisma. The women, sensing his struggle but unspoken in their amusement, moved with a mixture of grace and dominance. They weren't cruel, they were playful, yet their games revealed the vast difference in physical endurance between Clayton and them. It was a night where ego met reality, where wealth and privilege could not shield him from the demands of strength, stamina, and presence. Clayton had thought he was in control, that his money and influence could dictate the terms of the evening. Instead, he was being taught a lesson in humility, in ways he had never imagined. As the night stretched on, the mansion became a blur of laughter, movement, and playful challenge. Clayton's grand halls, usually quiet and stately, were alive with the echoes of the evening. The women moved with a combination of elegance and power, their towering figures casting long shadows in the dimly lit rooms. Clayton, though exhausted, found himself captivated, not merely by their height or strength, but by the confidence, intelligence, and subtle humor each of them carried. He had never encountered individuals who could so effortlessly command attention and respect, yet do so with charm and wit. By the early hours of the morning, Clayton could barely move. He collapsed onto a chaise lounge, his body aching in ways he had never known. The women, noticing his predicament, offered smiles and words of encouragement that were tinged with amusement. They had not intended to overwhelm him, yet their very nature made it inevitable. Clayton realized that the night had been a test, though not one planned by him. It was the natural outcome of engaging with forces he had underestimated. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him completely as he drifted into a restless sleep, sprawled across the luxurious furniture of his mansion. He knew that the coming day would bring both embarrassment and reflection. He had faced a night unlike any other, one that defied expectation and left a mark not only on his body, but on his pride. The women's departure was imminent, but their presence would linger in his memory, a vivid reminder of strength, endurance, and the humbling limits of even the wealthiest man. Clayton Hayes, the rich rancher accustomed to control, luxury, and admiration, had been thoroughly tested. The night had been unforgettable, intense, and surprisingly enlightening, and though he had thought the night would be about indulgence, it had become a lesson in humility, resilience, and the unexpected power of extraordinary individuals. The auction, the excitement, and the night itself would remain a secret tale, one he would carry in private reflection, knowing that some experiences are far beyond what money can truly command. Clayton Hayes woke with a start, his body protesting in ways he had never experienced before. Every muscle felt bruised, every joint stiffened, and even the simplest movements brought waves of discomfort. He tried to sit up on the edge of the bed, only to groan as his legs trembled beneath him, unsteady and uncooperative. For a man accustomed to control, power, and physical comfort, this was an unfamiliar and humbling experience. He had spent his life navigating challenges with ease, whether in business negotiations or in managing the sprawling expanse of his ranch. Yet here he was, defeated not by a competitor or a natural disaster, but by three women whose physical strength and commanding presence had left him utterly overwhelmed the night before. The memory of the evening returned vividly, a mixture of amusement, awe, and lingering exhaustion. The laughter of Ava, Serena, and Lila echoed in his mind, their towering forms moving with a combination of grace and power that made his own body feel fragile in comparison. He remembered trying to keep up with their games across the garden, the mock races, the playful arm wrestling, and the myriad challenges that had pushed him to his absolute limits. At first, he had approached it with bravado, certain that his wealth, status, and sheer confidence could carry him through. But those assumptions had crumbled quickly. By the end of the night, he had been reduced to a man barely able to move, sprawled across plush carpets and chaise lounges, utterly humbled by the experience. With great effort, Clayton swung his legs off the bed and planted his feet on the cold floor. A sharp jolt of pain shot up his legs, causing him to wince involuntarily. His body felt foreign, every step an arduous task. The realization hit him hard. He could barely walk. This was not a fleeting discomfort that would fade with a simple stretch or a warm shower. It was a consequence of pushing himself beyond his natural limits, and it served as a stark reminder that no amount of wealth or privilege could shield him from the laws of the body. Dragging himself toward the window, Clayton gazed out at the sprawling ranch bathed in the soft morning light. The fields stretched endlessly, golden and serene, yet the beauty did little to soothe the pain coursing through his limbs. He recalled how the three women had moved through this same landscape the night before with effortless energy, their long strides covering ground he could barely manage in several attempts. Ava's red hair had glowed in the dim light of the garden lamps. Serena's athletic frame had dominated every game with fluid strength, and Lila's commanding presence had made him realize just how little control he truly had. Clayton couldn't help but smile ruefully at the memory, even as he felt the heaviness of his own exhaustion. He attempted to make his way to the kitchen for coffee, hoping that caffeine might at least dull the pain and clear his foggy mind. Each step was a calculated effort, a careful negotiation with his own body. The simplest task, usually trivial, had become monumental. Even walking across the expansive halls of his mansion felt like a challenge worthy of respect. He was forced to lean on the ornate banisters, gripping them tightly, his muscles trembling with each cautious movement. Clayton had never experienced such vulnerability. The man who could command boardrooms, control hundreds of acres of land, and entertain elite guests with effortless charm was now completely at the mercy of his own physical limits. By the time he reached the kitchen, he was sweating, not from exertion in the traditional sense, but from the sheer effort required to simply move. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee provided a momentary comfort, a small anchor in a morning otherwise dominated by physical discomfort and self-reflection. As he sipped the steaming beverage, he thought about the night before, the energy, the laughter, the playful dominance of Ava, Serena, and Lila. He realized that while the experience had left him physically broken, it had also been profoundly eye-opening. For all his wealth and confidence, there were forces he could not control, energies he could not dominate, and strengths he could not match. The women had departed early that morning, leaving behind only the echoes of their laughter and a mansion still warm with their presence. Clayton remembered their final smiles, a mixture of amusement and gentle admonition, as they had wished him well on the morning of their departure. It was clear they had enjoyed themselves, not out of malice, but because they had revealed the reality of his limits. Clayton, for the first time in many years, felt a mixture of humility and admiration. He realized that wealth could buy access, privilege could open doors, but true strength, endurance, and presence could not be purchased, manipulated, or commanded. They existed in their own right, independent of his influence or status. As the day wore on, the pain persisted, and Clayton found himself reflecting more deeply on the experience. He considered the events not as a humiliation, but as a lesson. He had been given a rare glimpse into the extraordinary power of individuals who, by nature and nurture, possessed abilities far beyond the ordinary. Ava, Serena, and Lila had not sought to dominate him. They had simply been themselves, and in doing so, revealed the limits of his own ego. Clayton understood that their strength was not just physical. It was mental, emotional, and deeply rooted in confidence. He had underestimated the impact of their presence, and now he was living with the consequences. By mid-morning, Clayton attempted to walk to the stables to oversee the ranch operations. But even this small journey required assistance. He called for his butler, who appeared promptly, concern etched across his face. With careful guidance, Clayton managed to make it halfway to the stables, leaning heavily on the staff and occasionally stopping to catch his breath. The sun was high, and the ranch stretched endlessly before him, a reminder of both his achievements and his physical limitations. As he moved, he could not help but feel a sense of irony. The man who had once felt invincible, whose confidence had rarely been challenged, was now humbled not by failure, but by engagement with those far stronger than he had anticipated. The black physical discomfort was accompanied by an unexpected mental clarity. Clayton reflected on the night, the auction, and the choices that had led him to this moment. He realized that his desire for novelty, while often rewarding, had blinded him to the potential consequences. The evening had been a mixture of amusement, challenge, and revelation. It had forced him to confront his own limitations in a way that no business failure, physical labor, or financial loss ever could. In facing the women, he had faced himself, and the encounter had left an indelible mark on his psyche. As the day progressed, he found himself recounting the events with a mixture of embarrassment and awe. The playful dominance of the women, their effortless strength, and the way they had moved through his mansion and gardens with such ease lingered in his mind. He understood that their impact was not just on his body, but on his perspective. Clayton Hayes, for all his wealth, power, and influence, had learned humility. He had discovered that some experiences, no matter how extravagant or indulgent, carried lessons that could not be ignored. By late afternoon, Clayton had managed to move more freely, though each step still reminded him of the night's exertions. He sat on the porch, overlooking the expansive fields, reflecting on the lessons learned. The sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the golden plains. The mansion, once a stage for control and dominance, now felt like a place of introspection and understanding. Clayton realized that the night with Ava, Serena, and Lila had been transformative. It had tested him, humbled him, and ultimately changed him in ways he could not have anticipated. He thought about the fleeting nature of such experiences. Wealth and status provided opportunity, but it was the engagement with extraordinary individuals that left lasting impressions. The women had come into his life for a single night, yet their presence had altered his perspective permanently. Clayton understood that true power and strength were not measured in acres, money, or influence, but in endurance, confidence, and the ability to command presence through natural ability. As evening approached, Clayton made his way back to the mansion, exhausted but enlightened. He sank into his favorite armchair, allowing the events of the day and the night before to settle in his mind. The experience had been unforgettable, physically taxing and humbling, yet profoundly instructive. He knew that he would carry the lessons with him for the rest of his life. Money could buy indulgence, luxury, and access, but it could not buy respect, strength, or endurance. These were qualities earned, cultivated, and inherent. By nightfall, Clayton Hayes, rich, powerful, and once invincible in his own eyes, had transformed in subtle but significant ways. He had been humbled, challenged, and awakened to the reality that some forces, whether human, natural, or extraordinary, were beyond control. Ava, Serena, and Lila had departed, leaving only memories and the physical evidence of a night well spent, but their impact lingered in Clayton's mind. He knew that this was more than a story to tell. It was a lesson to live by, a reminder that humility, respect, and recognition of others' strengths were as vital as wealth, influence, and power.